Principle number 6, nomenclature. Now this chapter is a little confusing, but however it's the basis for how we're going to determine where we're going to move or have other people move for us. Now if you follow along in the section that there's a triangulation. It's an angulation component, verticality component, and a horizontal component. The angulation component is kind of telling you which way to go. Verticality is how high, and the horizontal is how far. So there's relative and absolute components to all three of those rather. So the angulation component is basically, from a relative standpoint, is right lateral. So I'd move to the right lateral. That also is R90 for the absolute, R90. And if you look at your functional compass, you'll notice what I'm referring to. The verticality component is how high. So the relative motion is, if I reach down to knee height, that's how high. Or if I reach overhead, that's how high. Now we can also add absolute components, where if I reach at 12 inches, or if I reach at whatever that be, 4 feet, whatever, that's a metric system component of it. The horizontal component is how far. So I can have the relative motion of initial range of reach, or end range reach, or 12-inch reach, 2-foot lunge, things like that. That's how we can determine how we want our clients to move, and it produces different chain reactions. Soon you'll see that when we get into the course of the hands-on component. The other things I want to talk about is the tri-post. So if you look at your functional compass, you'll notice that the tri-post is between the feet. Okay, that gives us which way we're going to go. So from that tri-post, 0 degrees is straight in front of us, or anterior in a relative sense. 180 degrees is straight behind us, or posterior. R90, like we stated before, is to the right, or right lateral. L90, or left lateral, and then everything in between. For example, R anterior lateral is the same thing as R 45 degree lunge. Now the degrees of motion is 0 degrees forward, R1 to 179 degrees, L1 to L179, a total of 360 angles in a compass. That gives us 360 different vectors that we can lunge and reach upon. Gives us a lot of options for exercise. The tri-post does change when we do lunge forward. So if I was to lunge, my tri-post now becomes underneath my foot. That's where I reference the reach. So if the tri-post is not underneath my foot, so I'll reach to L90 at knee height. Okay. Also, so if I was to do a lateral lunge to the right, an R90 lunge, the tri-post is now underneath this foot. So my reference is posterior at overhead. So I have to reach in this line. So we'll cover all that. It gets a little confusing. I'll send out different little questions for you guys, little scenarios with other videos, so you can really get this concrete. Now, when you're in a kneeling position, there's a list of how the tri-post is. Basically, let's put it simple. It's always going to be between your feet in your starting position, and it's always going to change when we do lunge. That's the only time it does change, rather. So if I'm in a single leg balance, it's under the foot. If I'm in a kneeling position, it's between the feet. If I'm lying down, it's between the feet. And that will be your references. Again, a little confusing. We'll cover this in our one-day seminar. Also, the safety syntax gets a little confusing. This is as simple as it is. If you look at my feet, I'm hip width apart. That would be XXX. It's all neutral. If I put my right leg forward, it's RXX. Right leg forward, but still in neutral in the frontal plane, still neutral in the transverse plane. If I was to widen my feet out, I'm neutral in the sagittal plane, but I'm now wide in the frontal plane, still neutral in the transverse plane, so that's X, W, X. If I turn my feet in, I'm neutral in the sagittal plane, neutral in the frontal plane, but I'm internally rotated in the transverse plane. So that would be X, X, I. And now there's 27 different components and combinations of that, and then add some asymmetrical things in there too. So look over the charts that are in there, experiment with that, email me, ask questions, and we'll nail this down. It does have some relevance because we can actually change each exercise that we do to make it a little bit different just by turning our feet. It creates a different chain reaction, even if I'm doing some stuff with my arms or some cable stuff. Opposite leg forward, same leg forward. It will all create a chain reaction and give you a much more, many more exercises to choose from, especially if you want to do specific things to turn on other muscles. And when we get into the muscle function, you'll see how that will work for us. So principle 6, nomenclature. Don't get too freaked out about it. It's just enough information to understand kind of how you can tweak things. So as we get into the exercises, tweak those exercises using those foot positions and using some of that vertical knowledge or using those terminology. That's how we're going to learn this stuff.